Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. When the announcement came toward the end of 2016 that Joshua Johnson was going to take over Diane Rehm's time slot on NPR radio, a lot of people said, "Who?" They had no idea that Joshua Johnson had trained for this opportunity since he was 5 years old, when he did his first interview with a stick. It's now been 16 months since Joshua took over as the host of 1A, which is heard on national public radio stations all across the country. When he came to Wilmington a few weeks ago on behalf of WHQR, I wanted to get to know the man behind the microphone and how he approaches the sometimes controversial, sometimes sensitive issues that you listen to every day.
I got the opportunity based on work I had done in San Francisco. I had put together a limited series called Truth Be Told, which was about race in America, which was distributed by PRI. The executive producer of a show called The Takeaway, which is also distributed by PRI, became the executive producer of the new show, whatever was going to be the successor to the Diane Rehm show. And he had heard my work from his previous job and threw my name on the list. And that got me an audition. I was the very last person to audition to fill in for Diane Rehm. So I sat in on a Wednesday and I filled in on a Thursday and a Friday news roundup. And based on that, the reaction from our producing station, WAMU, and the other public radio stations who were helping guide the process was positive enough to get me on the list and got me in the interview process.
During that interview process, what did you think of your own performance? How did you think you did? Did you like, yeah, I nailed it? Or were you like, oh man, I'm never going to get this opportunity?
You know, there's so many different reasons why people do and don't get jobs in broadcasting.
Right.
You know, I can't control any of that. All I can do is lay it all out there and walk away. Because you never know, sometimes an opportunity isn't really right for you. Sometimes someone will say, that was really good. You're not right for this, but I bet you're right for something else. Let me refer you. And even if it doesn't go the way I wanted, even if I don't get it, I just wanted to make sure, and I've always tried to do this with every audition, I wanted to make sure they knew what they were giving up by not choosing me. So you can pick someone else if you want to, but you need to see what you're leaving on the table. And if you're cool with that, that's fine. All I can do, and I still view 1A this way, all I can do is the show that's in front of me. I can plan for the shows that are ahead, but today it's game 7 of the playoffs. Like, this is the game I can play. I can't play anything else but this one. So let's just focus on today.
But how did you think you did?
I thought I did fine. I try not to get too attached to any show that I do, including now. I try to just be happy with it. Either it was a good show or it was not a great show, but I thought it was good. I mean, hosting is a pretty universal skill set.
Right.
You know, once I had built the skill set in Miami and then refined it in the San Francisco Bay Area, I knew what I was doing. So hosting really wasn't that tough logistically. It was more just, okay, this is a big opportunity, go in there and give it 100%. And, you know, I think I did.
Yeah, well, obviously you did.
Clearly, I did something right, I think.
Tell me about getting the phone call.
I was in Palm Springs on vacation, me and my partner, and I had been just sweating the whole time. And I was so nervous and was like, God, why do you hate me? Why won't you bring me this phone call? Just get it over with. Just put the knife in my back and turn it. And finally the phone rang and I got the call and my whole body relaxed. I wasn't excited, I was at peace. And I think I would have been at peace whether I got the job or not. I just wanted to know. And once I got it, you know, we went out and celebrated, but couldn't tell anybody because the announcement hadn't been made until after the election. So for me, it was more a matter of watching the election and the election cycle and the way the national conversation around that was going to end, and realizing that we were going to have to pick up thereafter and help the country move forward. I knew that either we were going to be looking at the first term of Donald Trump, who was a complete disruptor, or America's first female head of state. Yeah. So either way, the national conversation was going to be dramatically different. Cool. And it made it kind of easy for me. Like, whatever the election turns out to be, it's going to be a new day. And Americans are going to need some place to come talk in a way that's welcoming and thoughtful. And it made my prep for the show that much easier.
Was there ever a point where you sat down, whether it was at a cup of coffee or something, where it hit you the magnitude of what you were going from and what you were going to as far as an audience? San Francisco, major city, major market, but you're a national show, 2 hours coming in after somebody who had been there for 37 years. You weren't going to be her, but you were still going to have a major time slot to fill every day.
It was major. I knew it was a big deal. It was a big deal for a number of reasons. It was a big deal because it was like a childhood dream come true.
Sure.
It was a big deal because I'm the only black man hosting news on NPR. It was a big deal because this was a very fraught time in America where we were, really struggling for ways to talk to one another. I mean, people didn't go home for Thanksgiving and talk to their families because of the election. People didn't go home for Christmas. They didn't spend the holidays with their families because of the election. And I think that tempered whatever excitement I might have had about starting 1A because the need was so great and the country felt very wounded. So it would be almost like saying that I'm an emergency physician, I'm at the top of my game, I've finally been made the chief of emergency surgery, and all of a sudden, my first day on the job, there's been a plane crash, right? Yeah. I'm really good at what I do, but there's an emergency, so I can't really be excited. I think I felt very on, and I felt like every show was highly consequential, but I knew there was more important work to do. Plus, I didn't know if the show was gonna be a hit. Like, we could have taken over for Diane Rehm, and I could have worked my first year, and they said, thank you for your services, we're gonna go in a different direction. So, I just tried to kind of keep it in perspective. Just play today like it's game 7. And then set that aside, review my performance, and then play tomorrow like it's game 7. And then set that aside and review my performance, and then play tomorrow like it's game 7. And if we do that, then we'll have something to get excited about. 15 months in, 16 months in almost at this point in time. What has exceeded your expectations? What has been better than you thought it was going to be, easier than you thought it was going to be? And I'm going to ask you next, after this answer, what has been more difficult or what has been, really hasn't met your expectations as you thought out? I think what's been easier is finding people across the political spectrum who'll talk to one another. Like, it's really not, I hate to break it to you, but DC is very polar, but it's not that hard to find people from opposite sides of the spectrum who will talk in a very civil way. We've not struggled to do that at all. It's rather easy. The political debate that you see on cable news is real, but it's incomplete. There's a lot more to it. And we've had plenty of shows where people would just go at it for the entire hour, respectfully, but still intensely. And then the show ends, and they stand up, and they're friends, and they know each other, and like, oh, it was good to see you at that party. Hey, I'm sorry I heard about your mom. Listen, I'm going to catch a cab downtown. Do you want to hop in a cab together? Yeah. And life goes on. That was a lot easier, and it's heartening because it means we need to show that aspect of the political debate where people can say, I really don't agree with what he has to say, but I think he made a good point here when he says blah, 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 and people from my party need to take that into consideration if they want to win more votes. Like, there is a respect for the salient points of the other point of view.
But from the viewpoint of most Americans, they would think that Democrat in D.C. hates Republican in D.C. and Republican hates Democrat. And you're saying it's not a hate, it's just a strong disagreement when the light goes on?
In some cases, it is hate, for sure. In some cases, it's strong disagreement when the light goes on. So in some cases, they know my constituents back home are watching, and they need to know that I'm still going in there and beating up the guys they told me to come beat up. But for people who have been in the game for a while, they understand you're not a bad person. You see the world differently than me, but you're not evil. You're just wrong. And I need to fight you politically because I think you're wrong.
Right.
But the policies that I'm espousing would benefit you if you would just agree with me. It's very different than saying you as a human being are what's wrong with this country. It's a very, very different mentality. And it's heartening to be able to just work with people on that tip, because then we can argue the issues and not fight about who is a decent person.
What's been less than your expectation? What did you think you were going to be able to do, or what did you think the time slot and the program would bring you that maybe hasn't happened yet? Did you think it would be easier getting some certain people to come on and still hasn't happened?
No, we haven't. We like getting the big gets, but most of the shows that are the best are the ones where we get people's stories from across the country, and that's the bulk of what I think makes 1A sing when it sings. It's an inherently difficult program to build because we're just building something new. I think it's gone really well, but it takes a lot of energy to make sure that people feel a sense of agency with 1A. I think a lot of fans of NPR came out of the election feeling very dejected and wondering, how can we get more people to listen to the kinds of things that we listen to? Why won't they listen? Why won't they listen? And one of the things I initially had to do was remind them that no one likes being treated like a they. No one likes being othered. Right. And if anything, that was the lesson of the 2016 presidential election. Enough Americans coalesced around a candidate who recognized they think you're a they. Well, I think you're a we. And we can take the country back. We can make America great again. That was the whole lesson of the election. No one likes to be othered. And I think what's been the most difficult is trying to convince listeners on both sides of the spectrum not to other the other. We did a show from the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, in DC. We were invited. CPAC was like, we love 1A, we'd love to have you there. And we were like, we'd love to be there. So we went and did CPAC. We were treated so nicely. We were 2 tables down from the NRA TV booth. And people kept coming over like, thank you. We're so glad that NPR is here. We're so welcome. We're so happy you're here. But a number of our listeners who are much more progressive were furious that we went to CPAC. And I don't judge them for that. But they need to understand what we're actually here to do. We're not here to reflect your ideology back at you without challenging it. We're here to make space for everyone. And if today's the day you can't listen because it's just too visceral, that's fine. But we're going anyway. And as long as you understand why, that's cool. Just come back tomorrow, listen later online when you're ready. And I think the most challenging part has been impressing upon listeners who have deep political damage, who have political wounds, why it's necessary to unclench your fists and open your hands, to open up one more time. I know this hurts. I know this hurts. I know you're upset over, the Democrats. I know you're upset over the Republicans. I know that that conservative uncle of yours made you crazy over dinner. I know that your liberal daughter just doesn't want to listen to what you raised her with. I know, I get it. But we are still the nation of we the people. We are still a self-governing democracy in which each of us is the other's responsibility. And we don't have a choice in changing that. And if you want to knit the wounds we have, I know it's hard, but we have to open up. The good news is you don't have to do it by yourself. That's why we're here.
Aren't you doing old school journalism in that way?
Kind of.
But I say that you're giving, in a sense today, so many people turn to their side of the argument show, whether it's online, whether it's cable, whether it's radio. You're giving the other side in every instance, which is basically, in my book, journalism, both sides of the story. And you strive to do that, which tells me that your show is more of the old school journalism the way I learned it, as you've got to be objective. The people who listen, if they think I'm right in the middle of this, if they can't tell what side I'm on, then I've done my job.
Yeah, it's great when people say, I can't tell which politics are, I can't tell how you vote, and that's like good. You're not supposed to be able to tell.
Right.
I think it's old school broadcast journalism. Edward R. Murrow was kind of a standard bearer back in the mid to late 1930s.
Right.
This is London. I think it's old school broadcast journalism. I think it is new school journalism. Because if you look back, say, through print journalism, newspapers were always ideological. There were always newspapers on the left and the right. There were conservative papers, there were union papers. There were socialist papers, there were Democratic papers, Republican papers. I mean, there were abolitionist papers during Abraham Lincoln, and there were segregationist papers during Abraham Lincoln. That was the whole reason for the paper. The John Peter Zenger case, before America was a country, was all about a guy who hated this British lawmaker so much in New York, he started a paper just to tick him off. That's what he started a whole paper aimed at this one guy. So the idea of journalism being down the middle is a relatively recent invention of the modern age. It's what we want. but it's newer than we think. It's old in broadcasting. And so for me, I try to view it as hopefully another level of this relatively historically new journalism where I'm not here to be purely neutral, because I'm not neutral on racism. I'm not neutral on sexism, and I'd be a liar if I said I was. I'm not neutral on democracy. You know, racism is bad, sexism is bad, and democracy is awesome. Right. But I can be clinical. I can step outside of myself.
Yeah, you've used that word in a lot of interviews that I've read, done research on.
I can take a clinical step back and look at a story. And what I mean by that is when you are a clinician, a researcher, you wash your hands as well as you can, and you get as clean as possible. You can't get 100% sterile, but you get as clean as you can, and you handle your sample with care because you don't want to bring anything in to contaminate it. You learn as much as you can, and then you walk away. Doesn't matter if you're battling a disease that you hate. You can't sit there angry at the disease and expect to cure it. You have to calm down enough to understand it. For me as a journalist, I have to wash my hands of my biases, my prejudices, my preconceptions, my stereotypes, and go into my lab. I can't go in sterile, but I can go in clean with a mind to treat people like I don't want to contaminate this sample of your life, of your story that you've given me to learn from. And it doesn't matter what I think of you. It matters that I understand you, even if you represent a social ill. Because if I don't understand it, how can I cure it? Right. So my responsibility is to be a good clinician. And when I step out of my lab, all those biases, prejudices, stereotypes, they're going to jump right back on me because I'm human. Yeah. But in this space, we can agree that I will treat you in a clinical way, I will treat you in a welcoming way, I'll treat you in a respectful way, and it doesn't abrogate my right to be human and have points of view, but in this space, it can't be about me. It can't even just be about you. It has to be about us and what we gain from one another.
What was a young Joshua like growing up?
It's a pain in the neck.
Were you really?
Yes. Oh my God.
I know you wanted to be a talk show host.
I'm surprised they didn't drown me. I was everywhere. I'm sure I was adorable because, you know, you let the cute ones live. But I was insatiably curious. I was a voracious reader. I was not a know-it-all. I was an ask-it-all. I wanted to know everything in the world. I was the kid that you could, you know, some parents let their TVs babysit their kids. My mother let the Science Museum babysit me, all right? She could drop me off at the South Florida Science Museum, and I would be there. I would be waiting on the steps when she got back because I had learned it all. And I was done. I had inhaled the whole museum. Right. When I was little, one Sunday after dinner, I remember I walked around with a little stick, like a microphone, and I would interview people and I'd ask them if they knew how a carburetor worked. And if they didn't know, I told you.
Where did carburetor come from?
I told you I was annoying. And if they didn't know, I took great delight in regaling them with how a carburetor worked. And at the end, the response was usually something like, oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. To this day, I don't remember how a carburetor worked.
Yeah.
But I remember how I felt when I told them. And when they validated the fact that I had given them information that was useful. And I didn't know what a journalist was at the time, but I remember how it felt to be validated for having knowledge, for having useful information, and for understanding things. And people would just let me do it. Like they, you know, the old folks would be like, leave that boy alone, he ain't bothering nobody. Come on, boy, you can ask me. What you want to know? Hello, sir, can you just tell me who you're going to vote for? Josh, quit messing with that man. No, shut up, don't bother the boy. Come here, you can talk to me, boy. I'll tell you how I voted. I voted back in 1967. And then people would just open up.
Right.
So they just entertained me. And they entertained my precocious curiosity and never let me think that it was unacceptable. They made it clear that it was weird because they wanted me to be ready for the fact that other people might not validate you the way we do, but the people who do, those are the ones to go to. The people who don't, you let them be who they are, don't disdain them, but you might just have to make a wide berth around them. But they kind of knew how to govern my passions in a productive way without making me feel judged.
High school, college, when did radio or when did broadcasting or when did the bug bite you that you knew you wanted to do this for a living?
5 years old.
Oh, it was 5.
Past 5. I knew. I always knew that I loved broadcasting. I didn't know what form it was going to take, but I always knew I wanted to create and host a show since I was like 5 years old. Like this, there's really nothing else I could do and not be, rocking on the end of my bed at the end of the night with like a bottle in my hand, like, oh, it should have been me. It should have been me.
Right.
This was it. I always knew that my sweet spot was somewhere at the intersection of Bernard Shaw from CNN.
Oh, yeah.
Arsenio Hall.
Oh, there you go.
And Oprah Winfrey.
Okay.
Like somewhere in the middle of that. Like I loved how Bernard Shaw was just authoritative. That whenever he spoke, you just took what he said to the bank. And even if he was wrong, you knew he'd get it right. And then I loved growing up with Arsenio in the late 80s and early 90s, how he was just on the cutting edge, the very front of the culture. You tuned to Johnny Carson to find out who'd made it. You tuned to Arsenio to find out who was making it.
On the way up.
And that's who, I wanted to be that guy. And then Oprah was just everywhere. Like everyone talked to her. And you listened for that to be the canonical conversation about whatever mattered. And she spoke to the whole world. So something about that blend of authority, originality, and ubiquity, being at the pinnacle of your game, that always appealed to me.
Have you ever had a chance to meet any of those 3?
No, I haven't. Fingers crossed. Fingers tightly crossed. Hopefully someday I will get to.
You said that a summer program at Temple University helped you find your journalism. What do you mean by that?
Well, while we were there, it was a program at the School of Medicine, what is now the Fox School of Medicine, for minority students who were interested in careers in medical research. Because I was on my track to be a doctor before I came to my senses and settled into something steady like journalism.
Well, you were going to Miami and you took this as a summer course, right? Is that how it worked?
I did it as a summer course. Well, I did it as a summer course while I was still in middle school.
Okay.
7th and 8th grade, and then continued as I was at the University of Miami. But my mother went too. She was teaching research skills as part of the program. So we was kind of a live-work thing at Temple. And then one day she turns on WRTI Public Radio, which was the station at Temple University, which today is all jazz, but at the time was news and jazz. And NPR news and jazz stations tend to have a significantly higher black listenership. So she tuned in for jazz music and then heard Robert Siegel on All Things Considered. And it hooked her. And so she comes home like, oh my goodness, Josh, I just heard this thing. It's called National Public Radio. And I heard this story. And she tells me the story of her NPR epiphany.
Yeah.
And everybody has an NPR epiphany, more or less. And I listened to it and it just hooked me. So it was the beginning of that little nagging voice that said, you could be a doctor, but you should be a broadcaster. You could be a researcher, but you should be an interviewer. You could do what's doable. You should do what's never been done. And I couldn't escape it. I couldn't get away from the fear of regretting not doing what I most wanted. That's what I always tell students. We're like, oh, what should I do? I tell them, do the one thing in life that you would most regret not doing. Yeah. Whatever that thing is that would bite you around your heart and hold you until the day you died, don't live with that. I didn't. Go do the thing you would regret missing. And
it kind of goes back to when you were talking earlier that what people would miss if they didn't hire you.
Right.
Kind of goes back to that same mindset.
Yeah, I mean, if you lay it all out there, you got nothing to regret. Right. Like if you just put it out there, I can't be mad if they don't hire me. Okay, I gave it 100%. They knew what I was doing. Maybe they're the conduit to something I can't foresee, but I have nothing to be upset about that.
You did local TV for a while, and I think you said you got into public radio because local TV news was driving me crazy. But you were at WPEC in West Palm for a while doing local TV news, right?
Yeah, I was in the assignment desk. I wasn't on air. I was in the newsroom. And I just couldn't do it anymore. There are some local stations that are excellent. I'm not knocking local TV news.
Like WECT in Wilmington, North Carolina.
There you go, Channel 6. So I'm not knocking it categorically. But I had a hard time sitting at the assignment desk, listening to a bank of police scanners and waiting for something bad or traumatic to happen to someone so I could have an assignment for the day. I would rather have done stories about city councils and school boards and community groups, or just talking to people in my neighborhood and saying, tell us what's going on. And at the time, the station that I was at, that wasn't what I had a chance to do. I did it for a year just because I needed work, but after a while, it became very clear I can't do this. I can't do this, especially not in my hometown, where I know that this is a richer community than I get to depict. I can't bear this. So when the door opened for me to get into public radio, I bolted, and I've never looked back.
And what was you said it was a working partnership with the Miami Herald. What kind of partnership? What did you do to get actually your foot in the door?
Well, I went and auditioned. It was a reporter job, basically. So I went in, I put a mock newscast together, did a little report, and interviewed with the team. It was a partnership between WLRN Public Radio and the Miami Herald. So when I was hired, I was working for the Herald on WLRN initially. And went in, interviewed. They were a little skeptical because they said, you don't really have experience at this. Right. We've got people from the BBC and CBS News Radio and NPR who want this job. Why should we hire you? And I told them, you can hire those people if you want to, but I'm ready on day one. Like, I already know how to pronounce the name of Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Laitman, and I already know my way. I know the difference between I-95, 195, 395, and 595. I know the difference between Miami, Miami Beach, Miami Lakes, Miami Gardens, Miami Shores, Miami Springs. Like, I know you can hand me any assignment and I can drive myself there without a map. I am a turnkey reporter. Like, I am reporting on my home. I'm reporting for my neighbors and for my teachers and for my pastor and for my parents. So it will mean something to me different than it will mean to someone who's just on their way up and out. You get that person if you want them, but I'm ready on day one. And this means something, this community and community journalism means something to me because this is the only hometown I have. And I got it.
So then why go to San Francisco if it seems like Miami was it would seem to me to be the best place for you to be because of your experience and your desire to want to work in that community? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, really. He's like, hold that thought. It's funny, Tony Robbins says there are certain core needs that people have. One of them is certainty. The other is uncertainty. And after a while, I knew, there's more. Like, I need to go see what else is out here. And the opportunity in San Francisco showed up. It was great to be able to get out and see if what I thought I had built for myself was real. If the skill set I thought I had was really enough to get me to the next level. Thankfully it was. South Florida is a terrific training ground for higher positions. Mm-hmm. But I needed to go. And if you go and you fail, you go home. Like, you can always come back home, which is why it's home. Right. So, if I had failed from San Francisco, I could have got on the midnight train to Florida and just kept going past Georgia.
Just keep going right past Georgia, although I'm sure Georgia's lovely, and just go home. But I'm glad that I went. Clearly, I'm glad I went.
You get the national program. Why 1A? I know most people would think it's page one of the newspaper, but it's more than that. I heard you the first day, when you were on with Diane that day and they introduced you, I heard the explanation, but for those who don't and just think it's 1A of a newspaper, it's more than that.
Well, it's partly page 1A of the paper. That's what the Miami Herald calls its front page. So it refers to the kinds of stories we like to tell, the stories that are above the fold, that are the really big ones that everyone's talking about, but maybe need space to talk about them in more depth. Or the stories below the fold that aren't the huge stories of the day, but they say something about who we are or how we live or what we're interested in that are worth unpacking. The other main meaning, 1A, is the First Amendment. It's the basic kind of rules of the road for how we relate to one another in a democracy, these core freedoms. And if there's anything that seems to be challenged, it's the rules of the road. Because it kind of feels a little bit like Thunderdome outside. And that's not what our founders intended. We weren't designed to be a nation of bumper cars. We were designed to be not only a self-governing democracy, but a co-governing democracy. We're supposed to work together to govern the nation and govern in our common interests. So part of the name is about a reminder of these core freedoms that protect our ability to govern ourselves and to connect with one another and to make decisions about our democracy. And it lays out this requirement that we treat each other in a way that allows us all to be heard. You don't have to agree, but if we manage this space well, everyone gets to speak freely. And then we make smarter decisions about what we want to do.
Can you, when you're not on the air and when you're not working, can you listen to radio? Can you listen to another show or somebody else do their show without saying, boy, I would have asked this, or boy, can you put it away?
Oh, yeah. I can turn on PlayStation if I have to. I can go shoot bad guys for an hour, and I can definitely put it away. But yeah, I mean, I can't control what other people do. Like, other broadcasters make me less and less upset the more I do this show. A, I don't have the energy to be mad, because it just takes too much energy to be mad at somebody who I can't control. And then B, if I'm really upset, I could just do a better show. Like, why would I complain about how other people do their work? But the thing is, nobody needs to be upset over that, because everyone's got the capacity to speak out, whether it's on 1A or with your elected leaders or a local program, probably on your station. I mean, there are so many ways, especially now in this digital age, to be heard, that for anybody to whine about not having an outlet to speak your mind, I can't hear that. Don't come to me. Do not come crying to me about how nobody wants to listen to me. Well, who have you asked? Have you called your elected leader? Oh, well, they won't listen. Okay, so that's one thing you need to do. Yeah. Have you tried to speak out about this? Have you written anything? Have you written an op-ed in your local paper? Have you considered just a post on Facebook? Are you trying to speak out? Have you brought it up at dinner? Listen, I know we're having a hard time talking about this, but I heard this conversation on 1A. Could you listen to this and then we can talk again? What are you trying? Have you given up? If you've actually been stonewalled, that's one thing, and that's something that needs to be addressed in another way. But I'm out of tolerance for people who say, oh, nobody's going to listen to me. If you won't even try, in an era where all you have to do is go pull this thing out your pocket and try it, save it. There's too many people out there who are serious about what's happening in our democracy, and they're at least going to try. They may not get heard, and no one's entitled to listen. But if you won't even try, you're part of the problem. I always think about that verse from Dr. Seuss, from the end of the Lorax. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not.
Yeah. I'm going to peek behind that curtain. How do you put it away? What do you do to relax? You mentioned video games. What do you do to relax?
I am not shy about PlayStation. I love it. There's a new game coming out called Detroit Become Human, which is like a Blade Runner kind of choose your own adventure thing. I'm so excited. So that's going to be my gift to myself at the end of this month. I just put it away. Like, let me show you how you put your phone down. Ready? Watch this.
You can do that?
Ta-da! And just put it down. I think it's so easy to feel powerless in today's world, and bearing the burden by knowing every news notification when it dings can give you a sense of at least solidarity. Like, I can't fix this problem, but at least I'm aware of it. Take a breath. Like, there's nothing wrong with protecting yourself emotionally. We had one of the Parkland survivors on, and I asked him in the interview, I said, it's okay if you need to take a breath from this. You probably don't want to take a break, it's too soon, but it's okay to grieve, right? Like, it's okay to be angry. He said, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for grief. This has happened, and there's people, the NRA, and we got to deal with them. And I said, okay, but not for nothing, but when grief hits you, you won't have a choice. You will stop. And that if that happens, that doesn't mean you're weak, right? That's okay. We got too much work to do, and we just got to keep going. It's like, all right. And I get that. Like, I get that the world is in a place where a lot of people don't feel comfortable disconnecting because it's too important and I need to pay attention. There's too much going on and the stakes are too high. Yes, but if you're broken, if the news has broken you, if the news has scarred you because of the totality of it and the ubiquity of it, you're no good to anyone, including your democracy. You have to disconnect. You have to unclench your fists for a while. It's not healthy. To everything, there's a season. There's a time to laugh. Go laugh. There will be plenty of news when you come back.
Wilmington enjoys your show on a daily basis.
Honored by it. Honored by it. We'll try to keep it up.
Joshua Johnson, thank you for taking the time today, and welcome to Wilmington and continued success. We hope you come back again.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Big thanks to Joshua Johnson for taking time during his trip to Wilmington and sitting down for our podcast interview. You can listen to his show live every day from 10 a.m. to noon on NPR stations all across the country, including 91.3 WHQR here in Wilmington. You can also listen live every day. It's streamed on the1a.org, and you can also subscribe to the 1A podcast right after you subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on sites like Apple Podcast, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. Next week, Bobby Sanguinetti talks about representing the United States in the U.S. Olympic Games. He put on the red, white, and blue jersey and played for the U.S. men's hockey team during the 2018 Winter Games in Pyeongchang.
For me personally, like I said, the family was the big one. To have that support is probably number one. And from the hockey side of it, though, just like I said, being able to throw that USA sweater on with your fellow Americans, just there's no better feeling, and the pride that you play for, and to be able to represent your country and have the support from the people back home. The messages that you get. I mean, even when we lost a couple games, people were there for us, and it's just amazing.
That's Bobby Sanguinetti, pro hockey player and U.S. Olympian, next week right here on our podcast. If you know someone who you think would be a great interview for an upcoming episode, please send me an email. Let me know who it is, jevans@wect.com. What did you think of the podcast you just listened to? Please leave me a rating or a review as well. And if you send me a screenshot of that rating or a review, you could be the lucky listener we pick at random, and we'll send you one of those great WECT travel mugs. I'm John Evans. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of One-on-One.